Hello, and welcome to Halifax Public Library's Lest We Forget workshops, presented to you in partnership with Library and Archives Canada. In this workshop, you will have a chance to explore real service files of real Nova Scotians who fought in World War I, otherwise known as the Great War. You will meet people like Private Guy Hunter Dillman from Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. He is just one of 600,000 men who served in the war that began on August 4, 1914, and ended November 11, 1918. Did Guy enlist, or was he drafted? You will also meet people like nursing sister Margaret MacDonald, just one of 3,100 women who served in the Canadian Army Medical Corps. Was she one of the 47 who died while in service on the front lines? To complete this workshop, you will need 4 things: the name or regimental service number of someone who participated in the Great War. You'll need their military service file, the Lest We Forget question worksheet, and, most of all, your curiosity to explore these Nova Scotians' experiences during the Great War. To find a soldier or nursing sister, ask your family if they know of anyone, a great-great-grandfather, a grandmother, an aunt or an uncle who participated in the war. Or you can select someone from our list of names on the Halifax Public Library's Lest We Forget page. Your teacher may also assign a name to you. First, go to Library and Archives Canada website and click on the Personnel Records of the First World War database. Enter the name, first and last name, and click the Search database. You might get a number of results for the same name. Click on the one that closely matches the person you seek. Each person has a unique regimental number as well. You can use that to enter into the database. On the individual's page, look for the Digitized Service PDF file and click on it to download. Some files may be over 200 pages, so it may take a few moments for it to be ready to explore. You will find your question worksheet on the library website as well. These questions are to help guide you through the records and help pinpoint significant impacts of their role in the Great War. What was it like to serve on the front line? What dangers were they exposed to? And how did their absence from home impact their families? This PowerPoint will explain different types of paperwork in their military service files, like attestation papers, active service papers, medical papers, and pay sheets. We'll show you how to decipher information and tackle the handwriting. Let's look at the first type of record, the attestation papers. These forms were filled out when a soldier or nursing sister enlisted into the Canadian Army. Basic information was collected, such as their name, where they lived, where they were born, their occupation, and whether they had any previous military service experience. You'll also discover the date of enlistment and the swearing of the oath to serve the King and to follow all military orders. You will find answers to questions number 1, 2, and 3 on your worksheet in these files. Did you know that roughly 35,000 Nova Scotians, or 32% of the Nova Scotian population, fought in the Great War? Did the Canadian Army support enlistment from African Canadians, African Nova Scotians, or Indigenous peoples of Canada? The answer is both no and yes. When the war broke out in 1914, many African Canadian men tried to enlist in the Army, but they were rejected based on their identity or race. It wasn't until 1916 that a specific battalion, the No. 2 Construction Battalion, also known as the Black Battalion, was authorized on the 5th of July, 1916. It was the first and only all-black battalion in the Canadian military history, and it was raised in Nova Scotia with over 600 recruits from the Maritimes, Ontario, and the United States. The No. 2 Construction Unit worked on building roads, railway tracks, trenches, and bridges, including the dangerous work of defusing unexploded bombs found on the battlefields. They also assisted in removing wounded soldiers from the front line. Over 4,000 First Nations, also known as Status Indians, enlisted, starting in late 1915, and almost half of them were Mi'kmaq from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick area. 50 were eventually decorated for bravery on the front line. One nursing sister, Edith Anderson, came from Six Nations in Ontario. During the war, Indigenous soldiers were often employed in forestry, mining, and used as sharpshooters along the front lines. By the end of the war, about 500 Indigenous soldiers in the First World War lost their lives. When the others returned, many lost their status Indian identity, and many did not receive their pension from the Canadian government. Once accepted into the Canadian Army, soldiers were required to train before being sent to the front lines in Europe. Initially, training might happen locally in places like the Halifax Commons, on Citadel Hill, or McNabb's Island. Once they arrived in England, further training in camps like Aldershot, Bramshot, Whitley, and Shorncliffe would occur before they were sent to the front line. On any given day, a soldier may learn about how to dig latrines, understand military command, do mock battle formations, set up artillery guns, lead horses, dig trenches, fight with bayonets, shoot from a rifle, learn how to sew their repairs on their uniforms, or march for 50 kilometers with a 50-pound backpack on their back. Then the soldiers traveled overseas by ship to the front lines. You will find a lot of this activity on the next type of military service filed record, called the Casualty Form Active Service. So you use this form to answer questions 4 and 5 on your worksheet. There are 3 copies of the Casualty Form Active Service form that you're going to find in your military service file. The white form was kept in Ottawa, the beige colored form was kept in London, and the blue form, like the one illustrated here, was kept in the field along with the soldier. Many of the same types of information are on each of these individual forms. So at the top of the page, you will discover the initial rank of the person when they started with the Army, but this may have changed throughout their career in the First World War. Focus on the middle 3 columns, which are illustrated right here. The first column right here records their activity while on the front line or in base camp. So it may record promotions, it may record movement, it may record discipline, it may record being taken off strength or struck off strength. In the middle column here, this is where it took place. So it might have taken in France or in a place called field. Now, field is often used instead of a specific place because these records were meant to be kept on the front line, and if they were discovered by enemy hands, then the position of the unit would not be exposed. So anytime you see the word field, you're going to know that they were on the front lines in Europe. The military also communicated with common abbreviations like GSW, KNA, PTE. These are all abbreviations that you're going to find throughout your service file, and they often represent either injuries or ranks or struck off strength and taken on strength. So these are struck off strength is when you are taken away from a unit, and taken on strength is when you've been added to a unit. So when you see these acronyms and abbreviations in your service file, you know your soldier is moving around. One of the interesting things you'll discover in your service file is that some of the files were typed out, and a lot of them were in a variety of different handwriting styles. We know this is going to be hard for you to decipher, but there's a few tricks that you can use to pull out a word. So for example, on the casualty form active service, you'll see an abbreviation here, PTE, and this is an abbreviation for private, for the rank. If you can start to make out even just a few of the words, then you can start to fill in the blanks. You could Google PTE and find out what that means. With a name like this is Guy Dillman's name, you can start to fill out a few of the letters. So if you know that this is an ILLMAN and you know that the person's name is Dillman, you can understand that this is just a very fancy D. You'll also find lots of descriptions about wounds or about activity. So look for recognizable letters and start to guess the rest of the word. So if this looks like a W to you and this looks like a D and an S, look to see if the rest of the word spells out wound. So you're going to have to guess a little bit, but with practice, you'll start to realize that the words start to flow a little bit. Some handwriting is better than other handwriting. So if you see in this example on the bottom, you can tell that this is much more clearly written than this example on the top. Compare the handwriting with any typed records that you might find as well to find what they're saying. Just do your best in trying to transcribe the information. The sentences will start to flow once you start building the words together. If you need help, ask a teacher, ask a fellow student, ask a family member. They may have more experience reading handwriting and can sit down with you and help translate it with you together. So life in the trenches was a challenge for many who had never participated in an army or a war. It was a smelly, noisy, messy, uncomfortable, sometimes boring, sometimes terrifying place to live. Soldiers would eat, work, sleep in the same muddy 6-foot deep trenches as the rest of their unit. On average, a soldier would spend 6 days on the front line, 6 days as backup support, 6 days in base camp as a reserve, and then have 6 days off at the end of the month, usually spent in the nearest village or at a local YWCA or YMCA. Daily routines included equipment inspection, training, watch duty, repairing damaged trenches, sleeping, writing letters, playing cards, smoking, cleaning equipment, unit relocation, and reconnaissance missions. And there was that ever-present danger of injury and disease by living in the trenches. If a soldier got sick or was injured during a battle, it may be up to the stretcher bearers or a frontline first aid worker to retrieve them and begin the process of assessment and care. Some surgery had to be done immediately on the field or wounds dressed to stabilize the injured or ill soldier. Soldiers may be transferred to Canadian Army medical camp hospitals or clearing stations behind the front lines. Recovery may happen in general hospitals in France, England, or back home in Canada. And this is where they would meet with medical army doctors and nursing sisters. The Great War was the first time that women played a vital role in the health, welfare, and recovery of wounded servicemen near the front lines. As nursing sisters with the high rank of lieutenant, these young women were an integral part of the Canadian Army Medical Corps. The majority of nursing sisters worked overseas in military hospitals and in casualty clearing stations, but would also accompany troop ships in case of disease outbreak. Approximately 3,100 women served in the Great War, and 47 lost their lives in active service. Medical files found in your soldiers' or nursing sisters' files will help you answer question 6 on your worksheet, question sheet, which asks you to locate 2 interesting medical experiences. You can find these in the medical files or sometimes in the casualty service active forms that we looked at earlier. They may look like a small white index hospital registration card similar to the one pictured above on the left, or they may be a doctor's medical history sheet, temperature, or test result charts like the ones on the right. You may even find an X-ray to locate shrapnel or broken bones. Some things to keep in mind when you're looking at medical files. You may find both handwritten or typed medical information, often repeating the same diagnosis. Lots of paperwork meant an ongoing or repetitive treatment for trench illness or diseases. And a discharge from a hospital is not the same as being discharged from the Army. Some of the most common diseases were related to living in the muddy trenches and eating poor quality food. So illnesses like dysentery, jaundice, tetanus, trench fever, trench mouth, trench foot were all common to frontline soldiers. Or the disease may be related to pandemics such as the Spanish flu or influenza, or common diseases brought from home like tuberculosis. You may also be from active warfare and trauma like poison gas and shell shock. The next slide is an illustration of the 2 of the most common types of injuries, gunshot wounds and shrapnel wounds. A soldier on the front line was always in danger of gunshot and shrapnel wounds. The illustration on the left shows a gunshot wound through the thigh bone. Soldiers had a 95% chance of survival if they received medical attention in time. This type of wound may take 6 to 8 weeks in hospital to heal, and then the soldier was sent back to the front lines to rejoin a unit. The illustration on the right shows a shrapnel wound. What are the chances of a soldier recovering from this type of wound? Soldiers who worked near artillery were in increased danger of getting shrapnel wounds because they were the primary target for shrapnel bombs and exploding equipment nearby. A soldier was more likely to die from shrapnel wounds, especially to the head and stomach, and amputation of limbs were common. If this soldier survived the wound, he would likely be discharged as medically unfit and sent back to Canada. For many who joined the Canadian Army, it would be a new experience to visit a dentist. It was one of the benefits of joining the Army. If your service file has dentistry records, like the one shown on the right, these would count for question number 6. You will discover charts that indicate which teeth required fillings, which at the time were made of lead, and which teeth required extraction. Payday happened on the fourth week and were paid in French francs. Soldiers would spend the money on entertainment, food, gifts for home, or any special supplies they needed on the front line. Pay rates were determined by the level of rank and extra duties that were assigned to them. The rate and pay sheet will help you answer question number 7. Accounting sheets, like the one above, would have tracked the number of days, the rate per day, any extra duties, or whether the soldier served on the front line for an extra 10 cents a day. Pay month to month may vary, so look for the total credits column near the right-hand side of the ledger and write down any month's pay that you find interesting. For the average soldier, the Army paid roughly the equivalent of a laboring job, either on the farm, in a mine, on the railways, or other working-class occupations. The assigned pay sheets will answer question number 8. This was the amount that soldiers and nursing sisters designated to go back to their families at home in Canada. It was typically half or a certain percentage of their monthly pay. So in the assigned pay sheets, just look for the column that is amount, and you'll see roughly, on average, what they sent home per month. Did you know that the last Canadian soldier to be killed in World War I was George Lawrence Price from Falmouth, Nova Scotia? George was fatally shot in the chest by a German sniper as he stepped out of a house onto a street against contrary advice from those around him at 10:58 a.m. on November 11th. The Great War ended on November 11th at 11 a.m. in 1918. For many, the return home to Canada did not happen until the following spring in 1919. It meant that soldiers were still exposed to dangers from frontline diseases like influenza and accidents in base camp. So what did the end of the war sound like? Click on the End of the War link to hear the coda-to-coda recording, World War I Armistice Interpretation. Listen carefully. After the war ends, what other sounds do you hear in the background? Soldiers would be officially demobilized back to Canada and then discharged from the Canadian Army. You will find paperwork of these final movements, and that will help you answer question number 9 on your worksheet. If your service files don't have a discharge certificate, check your medical files. Did they survive the war? Now you're ready to begin working on your soldier or nursing sister military service file and answer the questions on the worksheet. So first, step 1, find that attestation paper and find out the name of the community they lived in, when they were born, what their names were. Step 2 is to find the casualty form active service, find their rank, and any kind of movements or promotions or discipline. And you'll also find on this sheet hints on whether they survived the war or not. Step 3 is to find the medical forms and hospital cards to identify diseases and injuries. And step 4 is to look for pay sheets and assign sheets. If you're doing this with a class or with a group of people, you may want to note any other interesting things that you discovered in the file. These are great to discuss in person. You're able to tell other people what their story was and what you've discovered looking through these files. is a sample of a completed worksheet for Otis Aidan Dory. He was from Queensland, Halifax County, Nova Scotia. He enlisted on April 18, 1916, and his rank was private. He arrived in England on the troop ship the SS Olympic on October 18, 1916, and he joined the 13th Canadian Battalion in December 5, 1916. While with the Canadian Army, he was admitted to the No. 3 Canadian Field Ambulance for tonsillitis, and he also had some incomplete dental work, getting fillings and extractions. His pay was $34.10 on average, and he sent about half of that, $15, home to his family. Sadly, Otis Aidan Dory was killed in action on November 24, 1917. We hope you enjoyed exploring the Great War from the unique perspective of Nova Scotian men and women, and think of them next Remembrance Day ceremonies in your community. For more information, check the library catalog at www.halifaxpubliclibraries.ca for books and DVDs about Canada's role in the Great War.